Hey, friends, and welcome back to the RevRx Podcast. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so glad for you to meet our special guest today, Alycia Wood. She's doing tremendous work at the intersection of understanding why we believe what we believe as Christians. And so, Alycia, welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for joining us today.
No, thank you so much for having me. And I loved hearing about your recent passion for apologetics. And I'm glad that we share that in common. And I think it's a very timely field for where our culture is at, for sure.
It is. The culture is becoming increasingly, it seems like, hostile to Christianity. And we see that in various places. And, I've shared with you a little bit over the last year or so. God won't let me get away from this idea of equipping people to understand that there's good answers behind the good questions we have about our faith.
Yeah,
for
sure.
And, realizing that there is a substance, a strong substance on which our faith is built. And realizing that, hey, what we believe is true. That builds your faith for one, but then it also allows you to interact with our society and our culture today in a way that makes a lot of sense. But for so much of my life, I didn't get that. And so now I'm on a mission trying to help others realize that there are good questions about your faith, but there are good answers as well. So thanks for the work you're doing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you're spot on. I mean, I definitely think that there is a sense of hostility towards Christianity and the culture, in the sense of some of it is Christians' own fault, really the fault of Christians in themselves, just doing stupid stuff, saying stupid stuff, and all of that. But at the same time, it's also a really interesting area. So while there is tension with Christianity, we're also seeing the rise in the number of people that are actually flocking to the churches or just seeking for spirituality, especially amongst Gen Z men. They say the men are now outnumbering the women in the churches for Gen Z, that is not normally what we see. And so we have these two things kind of happening and I think this is where the apologist, like the role of the apologist, is really important, right? So the role of the apologist is really the bridge in between the church and the culture, is how I see it. So those people, those young men, or just those people who are seeking for something spiritual and not sure where to go, the apologist has, information for them and can walk with them and guide them and say, well, here's why I think you should land on Christianity. And at the same time, for those that are like, I hate Christianity because you guys are like this and you say this and you do this, well, the apologist is like, well, let's talk about that. And what did they say? Yeah, that's actually not Bible. Or that's what right. was the theory? So the apologist goes into both of those worlds. And it's really, I find so much of what I do is reshaping what true Christianity is versus what people think it is. And so that's going to apply to both camps, the person who doesn't like the Christian and the person who's seeking. And, when I say Christianity, I'm thinking one thing, but somebody else might be thinking another thing. And it's kind of like bringing them to, here's what the real Christianity is. If you want to reject it, okay, that's one thing, but at least you're rejecting the true version and not just something you saw on TV or you read in some social media post or something like that.
That's huge. And I think that's in the apologetics course I'm teaching at our church right now. One of the things I keep saying is, you say Christian, but a lot of people don't necessarily mean the same thing by that. And so you put words to that beautifully. I appreciate it. But yeah, there's this sense of, okay, what caricature of Christianity are you relating to Christianity? Because sometimes it's not really the truth behind it. And so reshaping and reforming, okay, what does it look like to truly be Christian and to have a Christian worldview, I think is paramount. So, incredible. I can tell this is going to be a good one. You guys buckle up. But you are out there and you are making a difference for seekers, for those within the church, for those that want nothing to do with Christianity. But I love what you said. Reject it. That's fine. That is your choice. But reject it for what it really is,
right?
And not what you have come to think that it is. And social media plays a big part in that, right? As far as the seeing different aspects of quote unquote Christianity, but really that's not the truth of it. What's been your experience with that and how social media has kind of misconstrued what it means to be Christian and to think like a Christian?
Yeah, so I think I would probably do a combination of social media, the political landscape, maybe the news, whatever news media source it is, whether it's print or, TV or something. I think it's a combination of a lot of things that have shaped what Christianity is for people who are not Christians, and I remember years ago, I can't imagine this. I don't know what the statistic is now, but I just remember this was probably close to 15 years ago, a friend of mine saying that 3/4 of Americans don't know a Christian. I'm like, that's not true. That cannot be true. And he was like, well, Alycia, how many Buddhists do you know? And I was like, well, how many Buddhists do you know? And I was like, and it made me stop and think. And so if you are someone who's not a Christian, say a Buddhist, a Hindu, a Muslim, whatever, if you don't have a Christian in your life, then what you're shaping your view of Christianity is from what you're seeing on social media, on the news, and in culture, whatever. That's how you're shaping it. And so I think those things weigh heavy on someone who doesn't have access to, is not a churchgoer, doesn't read the Bible to find out what it believes, or doesn't have a Christian in their life. I think that that's extremely influential, all of those sources, as to shaping what it is that Christianity actually teaches.
Absolutely. And some of it's unintentional and some of it is intentional, with some sort of agenda there.
Yeah.
But there's a lot floating around about what does it really look like to be a Christian? What does it look like to, to really have that worldview and see things through the lens of Christianity? And, I was actually on social media this morning, and there was an open letter by one pastor to another pastor, and it's basically like, I don't think you see things right. And, those are always fun, right? These open letters put on social media. But, when there's people on both sides of that aisle, and the discrepancy between both of them is huge. And so, how can two people who call themselves Christians line up so differently on the spectrum of what it looks like to live as a Christian in today's world? And you're right. There's so many factors there.
Yeah.
So shaping and forming and reshaping and reforming really comes in vital when it comes to that. So thinking about true Christianity and thinking about our culture today, we live in a culture, and this is kind of our topic today, live in a culture that tends to cancel anyone who does not line up with a certain set of beliefs.
Correct. Yep.
Or ideas.
Yep.
And so cancel culture, we've heard that phrase. I'd love to kind of dig into that a little bit with you. What are your thoughts about cancel culture? Let's define it, make sure we're talking about the same thing here. Where did that come from, and kind of where has that led us as a society?
Yeah. So cancel culture, well, first let's look at the word cancel, right? When we used to talk about cancel, it's like, oh, I have a birthday party coming up in 2 weeks. I'm inviting you to it. And then you call me, 4 days for, I was going to come, but I have to cancel. I can't come. Or like if you owe me a debt, let's say you owe me $10,000 and you're like, I'm struggling to pay this, Alycia. And I'm like, you know what? I'll just forget about it and I'll just cancel your debt. Now you don't owe anything. So when we talked about canceling, it applied to like events, it applied to objects, it applied to things. But what we did in recent times is we took that same concept of canceling and we like erasing, we applied it to people. So instead of erasing your debt or just forgetting about your debt, I'm erasing you, I'm forgetting about you. And we applied it to human beings. And it's such an oxymoron, because the reason why we apply it to human beings is because, somebody did something wrong that we disagree with. And so we have determined that they therefore should be eradicated from our lives. So maybe they're a famous film star, we won't watch their videos or their movies. Maybe they're a music artist, we won't listen to their music. Maybe they're an author, we won't read their books. So there's this thing of like, instead of erasing the debt, I'm erasing you altogether from my life. But what's so freaky about it is that, well, people do things wrong all the time, and they always have. And so there's not like all of a sudden, oh, this actor was perfect their whole life and then they did something wrong. It's like, no, actually, they've always done things wrong, because all humans have done things wrong. It's just that now we've changed how we want to respond to that. And as a result of that, it's just led to this, I would say, overcorrection of how we respond to what I would say sin. So meaning anytime we live in a way that's contrary to how God desires us to live, that, we are essentially saying, because of what you've done wrong, you are no longer even deserving of my acknowledgement of your existence. And that is a massive overcorrection. And I would say it's very anti-Bible for sure as well. And as a result, there's some people who've been canceled. I mean, it isn't just like, Christians. It can be, goodness, J.K. Rowling, the author of Harry Potter, was canceled because of her stance on the gender issue and men and women's spaces. And she was very vocal. And people were like, you couldn't possibly be the Harry Potter author. And it's like, what? Just because she has a view on that? Ellen DeGeneres was canceled because of accusations of workplace like hostility. And there's all these things. So anybody really, it's not about Christians. It's not about non-Christians. It's just about people in general that can feel the wrath of what I determine is worthy of it. So you do these other things, okay, that's not worthy of canceling. But now I determine this thing is now where you've crossed the line, you're worthy of canceling. And it's kind of where we used to let the criminal justice system handle it. Hey, there's violence. Hey, there was this, sexual act that was immoral. We let the criminal justice system handle it. Now we're saying, I'm going to handle it.
Yeah, kind of the
And
court of public opinion, isn't it?
that's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was a great explanation of kind of what we're looking at. And man, there's so many problems with it. And you're right. It's kind of it's all over the spectrum. It's not just people acting out and within the Christian community and butting up against some of these ideas, but it's everybody.
Hmm.
But there is this sense of superiority that's kind of behind it, right?
Hmm.
When I began to make the rules that this is right and this is wrong and this will be tolerated, this will not be tolerated. What does that kind of tell us about maybe an inflated ego or inflated, kind of just the world revolves around me? I'm not sure what the term is for that, but that's kind of what I see in your description.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that people just took on this sense of authority that they have this right to maybe do that, to treat somebody in that way. And look, I was a criminal justice major, right? So I believe in the criminal justice system. I'm not one to say, I'm not saying that, people shouldn't be penalized what they do wrong. We shouldn't hold people accountable. It's not what I'm saying. Cancel culture when you cancel somebody, it doesn't mean that the legal system is like you're replacing the legal system. The legal system is still going to do what it's going to do. Cancel culture is dealing with how you respond to the person yourself. How do you respond?
Yeah,
I don't have
person.
Yes, I don't have the ability to, be a judge and bring somebody to court and hand down a physical sentence and send them to prison. And so as a result, I'm going to be my own judge in the court of public opinion, and I'm going to hand down the sentence that I can, which is I'm not going to watch your movies, and I'm going to say let everybody else know, to encourage everybody else to follow my stance, or I'm not going to. And keep in mind, these are people who've done some pretty serious things that are wrong. And what we used to say is like, wow, that's really not good. You weigh out, you see what happens. Are they going to prison? Are they found innocent or guilty? And then, they go off to prison or whatever, and you kind of just move on with your life. Now people's faults become their life. And so we have taken on like this role of responsibility that we didn't previously have, and just giving ourselves a sense of power. Yeah. And even a sense of, like you said, pride, because the reality is if everybody's done something wrong at one time, well, that includes you.
Right.
So it's like the people who are canceling others also end up canceling themselves too. And you'll see that.
Well, and it's when we think about it that way, and they kind of flip it around a little bit as well. There seems to be this joy, not a great word, maybe joy from the masses to see other people's failures exposed.
Mm.
And I think pride is behind that a lot. But I mean, if we're going to go around canceling people because they do something wrong, then yeah, we've got to cancel ourselves, and there'll be nobody left. Everybody's now canceled.
Nobody.
So why do you think it is that we, and hopefully Christians aren't wrapped up in this, but we know that they are. This joy of seeing other people fail, other people's failures exposed. What about that can kind of be satisfying to us in a way?
I don't know. Maybe we've taken on the behaviors of the Pharisees, like the Pharisees, were so proud of themselves for being so good.
Yeah.
And they weren't like those other people. They fasted, and they kept the laws, and they gave their money, like they paid their tithe, like they did everything right. And where is it? Luke 18, wherever it is, I can't remember, but the story of the Pharisee and the tax collector.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that section starts out with, and I'm summarizing it, but it says, Jesus, to those that thought they were more righteous than everybody else, or they were better than everybody else, Jesus told this parable. And his whole thing was to say, look, you may think you're so great, but the one that actually was great, Pharisees, was the guy who just sat down, fell on his face, and just acknowledged his mess. And you're so focused on your quote unquote goodness that you can't see your mess. And I think as Christians, and as a culture, that's really where we went. We look at the Pharisees like, oh, they're so stupid. Oh, they're so cocky. And we don't realize that's not unusual to have that response. And I think that we don't see it in ourselves, and I think there's certain quote unquote sins or moral actions that people do that make Christians feel more justified in pointing the finger than other ones.
Yeah, and that was my next question. Maybe we can camp out there for a minute, because there is this real tendency, and I think it happens in the church, where some sins are, considered minimal, and some sins are kind of picked on. And largely it's sins that we don't struggle with that we tend to pick on the most. You struggle differently than me, and so I don't relate to you, and so therefore I can't really wrap my head around what you're doing. But we point out other people's sins while we minimize our own sin. And there's another way to think about that too. And this is something I've discovered years and years ago, but it makes so much sense of our culture and of our society and of us as humans. We want grace for us,
Yeah.
and we want justice for everybody else, don't we? What's your take on that? Can you unpack that a little bit for us with your experience and what you're seeing as you're traveling the country and you're talking apologetics to these people and you're out on the front lines and you're able to see people in whatever state that they're in? What is it about us that thinks that, okay, your sin's wrong, but my sin is okay?
Well, the blinders thing is real. So we blind ourselves to our own failures and our own faults. I always think of the story of woman caught in the act of adultery,
Yeah.
and the whole point of the Pharisees was to say, look at what she's done, God, or Jesus. Sorry, they wouldn't say God. Look at what she's done, Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Look at what she's done. We haven't committed those things. Or just like the thing that's happened. Look at this person. Look at the filth that they've done, but we have done. And so I think it is part of our desire to not acknowledge our own faults. We want to think ourselves as better than we are. And I think this is where I recognize, and I like to point out to people, look, even if you lived a completely perfect life but only lied one time, you just told one lie, but everything else you did perfect, Jesus would still have been crucified for that one lie.
That's right.
So whether it's that lie or whether it's because you stole somebody's car or whatever, that is still requiring his death. Now, are there different consequences? Absolutely. And that's where the legal system comes into play. There's different consequences for different things. And that should be that way because of the degrees and intensity and the harm caused based off of the certain things. So I fully agree with, sentences and different sentences for things. I don't think you should be in prison for life for telling a lie to your spouse.
Sure.
So I definitely agree with the differences in the sentencing, but I think that we also need to recognize, especially as Christians, when we have the perspective that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, when we have that perspective, then what we need to realize is this is where the Pharisees failed. They looked at their standard of goodness by comparing themselves to other people. So I'm good because I'm not like them. And that was a fundamental failure. If you want to determine whether you are a good, quote unquote, good person, then I don't compare myself to you. I compare myself to Jesus. That is the standard of morality. And when I compare myself to him, well, I'm in the same boat as you, regardless of what you've done or what I've done. And so I think we forget that we just have a faulty mindset, I think, at times, and we just take on the mindset of the world, which, I'll try and share the gospel with somebody and they'll say, oh yeah, I'm going to go to heaven because I'm a good person. How are they determining that they're good? They're saying, I'm not like those in prison, or I'm not like this really bad friend that I have, or I'm not like this. Remember, they are determining whether or not they're good by comparing themselves to other people, and they determine that they are better.
Yeah.
Christianity doesn't do that. God is the standard that we are all compared to, not each other. And we have to remind ourselves of that as Christians, that if that's the standard, then we all fall short of the glory of God. Yeah. And so when we let ourselves come up with our own kind of way of determining this goodness, that's where we end up with feeling like, well, I can point out your stuff and I don't see mine as bad because I'm not as bad as you.
That's right. Ooh, feel like we've been to church. This is good. And I think even back to the first sin, like even back to Genesis 3. Adam and Eve, of course, they did the very thing that God told them not to do. And I don't think there's anything magical about the fruit. I think it was just doing life apart from God, apart from God's plan. And when God's like, "Hey, what y'all been doing?" That's the Southern version. What y'all been doing? What did Adam say? He's like, "Oh, well, it's the woman you put me with. She tricked me into it. Or she talked me into it." There's this shifting of blame, isn't there? To where it's like never our fault. We're not as bad as we don't like to be made to feel bad. We look around and we're like, oh, okay, well, I'm pretty good compared to most, but that's not our standard.
Mm-hmm.
And when we see that perfection is the standard and we all fall short of that, wow, then that's a humbling experience. And we stop being, we should stop pointing our finger at other people and realize that, hey, I'm in the same boat. So I love that.
Exact same boat. Exactly.
And so when it comes to Jesus, we talked about him as our standard. And while we cannot reach that level of perfection on this side of things, we do kind of have him as our, as our example, right? What would Jesus do? I remember those bracelets from the 90s.
Yeah.
WJD.
WJD.
What would Jesus do? So would Jesus cancel people? I mean, he came across people who failed like crazy.
Yeah.
And thinking about that question, would Jesus cancel people? Jesus had a way of kind of balancing, like he never ignored sin.
No. Mm-mm.
But he also never discarded people.
Right.
Can you help us think about that and kind of the Christ-like approach to the cancel culture that we're seeing?
Yeah. So there was this guy I was reading once, Aaron Rose. He's like a diversity inclusion type person. He was like a consultant. And I don't know if he was a Christian or not. I don't really know much about him, but I read something that he wrote in like Vox magazine. I think it's a magazine or an email or whatever it was. And he talked about he used to be very pro cancel culture, and then he shifted and he changed. And I think he would identify as like a progressive. So this is not some super ultra conservative type people. But he says that when he was looking at the internet, he noticed some things that were troubling. And this is what he said. He says he noticed that mainstream internet activism is a lot of calling out and blaming and shaming. But we have to get honest with ourselves about whether calling out and canceling gives us more than a short-term release of cathartic anger. And he started making the shift, realizing that this was just about releasing this anger, this tension that we had. And he thought that those that used to create change, that used to bring about, like, make things better, make humanity better, make civilization better. But then he goes on to say, but then he went to realize that he wasn't seeing the true change that he desired. And he said, we were still sad and mad, and the bad people were still bad, and everyone was still traumatized.
Well,
and so then he says now, and this was so key to me when I read this, he says that he now wants to create more stories of transformation rather than stories of punishment and excommunication. And I'm like, okay, like I said, I don't really think about this guy in terms of is he Christian, religious or not. But when you say to me, you want to see more stories in which you want a culture that focuses on transformation instead of punishment and excommunication, that sounds very familiar to me.
yeah, it does.
Because the gospel message is all about taking something old and transforming it into something new. That from the old to the new man, that is transformation. And I don't know if Aaron realizes what he's saying there, but this story, creating stories of transformation, to me is a very biblical concept. And so would Jesus cancel? No, I don't think he would. And I think the reason why he wouldn't is because I think redemption, transformation, restoration, all of these things were important and are important to Jesus, right? So things can't be redeemed, but people can.
Amen.
And that was, I think, is the focus of where Jesus would have gone. And that's why with the woman caught in the act of adultery, hey, this isn't the end of your story. I don't approve of this. Like you said, he didn't approve of the sin. But don't do this again. Become somebody new.
Yeah.
You know, and so you see that. And so I think Jesus would have taken a very different approach, because cancel culture gets rid of things like forgiveness. I can't forgive you. Yeah. I have to hold you accountable for the rest of your life. Even if you did it 16, 17, 18, 20 years ago, I have to hold you accountable.
That's who you are. Yeah.
That's who you are. So your identity becomes your sin, and your life is now defined by the worst thing you ever did. So what is the point of the cross, right? If we read in the biblical text that as far as the east is from the west, he's taken away our sins. Well, now I've actually not even allowed them to be taken away. I've actually made that who you are and who I will always see you as.
Yeah, wow.
So cancel culture cannot be any more contrary to the gospel, because of the fact that it eliminates this old to new, that you can become somebody new, that you can be wiped clean, that you can be forgiven. That when God sees you, what he sees is a person who's created in the image of God. Doesn't see a person who's lied and cheated and da-da-da-da-da. And if he did see us that way, it would cause us to lack the motivation to change or improve, because it's like, no matter what I do, he's still always going to see me as that cheater. So what's the point of me becoming new? What's the point of me being somebody different if that's all I'm ever going to be?
And I think you hit on something, and a large part of that is identity. Shame culture makes your identity the worst thing you've ever done. Jesus Christ has come to set you free from the worst thing you've ever done, and to make you new, to make you a new creation. The old has passed away, the new has come. And in him, we can have new life. In him, we can have new identity. And in cancel culture is exactly the opposite of that. Cancel culture leaves you in your sin and calls you by your sin. And Jesus calls us out of that. What a tremendous explanation of the gospel story. And you use that word redemption. Cancel culture, can't say that again. Cancel culture does not leave room for redemption. does not leave room for forgiveness, because now you are this person who has done these terrible things.
Exactly.
And the end, like, that's the end of your story.
That's it. That's who you always be. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But the gospel, what we as Christians believe and put our hope in, is a gospel of redemption. It's a gospel of the fact that, you once were this way. And I hear it like when I'm counseling people. Sometimes I do marriage counseling. These people are going at it. They're trying to stay out of a divorce, and so they're coming to talk to me. And no pressure, but hopefully you can help us. And one of the things I hear a lot is, "Well, it's just the way that I am."
Yeah.
And they use that as an excuse to stay exactly as they are. And brothers and sisters, I tell you that that's the hope of the gospel. You do not have to be stuck in who you once were.
Yeah.
How you are right now is not who you have to be.
Yeah.
There is hope, and there is a future for those that put their hope in Christ and who put their faith in him. But anyway, I've started preaching. Let me get
That's
down
fine.
off that. But when we think about redemption, I think about example after example after example in Scripture. I think about Paul, who persecuted Christians. He was complicit in the stoning and killing of Christians,
Mm-hmm.
and yet his story did not end there. The persecutor of Christians became, one of the most prolific writers that Christianity has ever seen. And I think about not only him, but I think about like David in the Old Testament. I told a story about David last night in our Bible study, and thinking about, man, this guy had it all, right? But he had his moments. He was a man after God's own heart, but yet he committed adultery and murder. That's a pretty far fall to when you think about it. But he wasn't canceled. He was given redemption. You read Psalm 51 and you see his repentant heart, and you see exactly what it is that God's dealing with him with. And he goes back and says, "Restore me to the joy of my salvation." Oh man, you hear his heart pouring out, and you're like, something happened in this guy. And we see that, okay, he's been redeemed, right? And then we see Peter. Peter, one of my favorite characters in the Bible. I relate to him so much. Just never know what's going to come out of his mouth. Kind of has a chronic foot and mouth issue, but he denied Christ 3 times.
Yeah.
At the worst moment, and that could have absolutely been his identity.
Yeah.
And I think he was well on his way to letting that shape his identity. But then we see the resurrected Christ make his way across the Sea of Galilee over to where the disciples are having breakfast. And he asked him 3 times, "Do you love me?" And through that story, he was now redeemed as well. So we see story after story in the Bible, and that's just touching the surface, right?
Mm-hmm.
You see story after story of, okay, these people have fallen. Well, guess what? Brothers and sisters listening, you have too. I have too. We're all in the same boat. But here's the thing. Your sin does not have to define you. It doesn't have to be your identity, because Christ gives us hope. And he has that. Those aren't permanent labels that are affixed to us,
Right.
because we can be redeemed through Christ. Love to hear your take on that. I know I've talked.
Yeah.
I've kind of had a
No,
monologue
it's fine.
there. But
No, I think you're absolutely right. And David's an interesting one too, because David shows us that while he reaped the consequences of his sin, so did his child.
Yeah, that's right.
And so, it's a good reminder. So, okay, so it's a good reminder that our sins don't only affect us.
Yeah.
Goodness, I don't even know. A long time ago now, I was like nannying for a 5-year-old, and it was like a townhouse type situation, row homes technically. So there was like this little gate when you open up the front door, this little gate in between us and the next door for the neighbor to kind of just separate us from the neighbor. But it was only a couple feet high, so you could climb over it. And I remember she would always climb over, and I kept telling her, "Don't climb over it. You're going to get hurt," or "Don't climb over." And she would, she wouldn't listen, or if I wasn't looking, she'd climb over, and she always was fine. She never got hurt, but she would climb over in front of their door and then climb back in front of our door. But what I didn't realize was that the little 3-year-old in the house was watching this. And one day we come outside, and the 3-year-old has all of these little scrapes on her knees and everything, and, all bruised up. And we asked them, "Well, what happened?" And she said, "Well, she tried to climb over the gate." And I was like, "Remember all those times I told you not to do that? You didn't get hurt, but she was watching you."
Yeah, that's right.
And she tried to follow that example. And so David is an interesting story, because I think so often we just think, oh, it's my life. I can do what I want. It doesn't impact other people.
Yeah.
But the reality is that it's a very Western and narrow way to look at the world in terms of very individualistic. The things we do affect people all the time.
Mm.
If I chose to be a doctor, well, I wouldn't be on this podcast, and everybody listening would have listened to somebody else, and they would have learned all kinds of things, but they wouldn't have learned the things that I was going to say because I'm busy being a doctor, right? So as a result, like, our actions impact. And David is a really interesting story because it lets you know that the things we do wrong impact other people around us, and specifically his son. That baby lost its life as a result of their sin. But either way, and David, of course, reaped the consequences, and it kind of went on, through his family. But I do think that there's something about this brokenness that is worth just expounding on just a little bit. Because I do think the Christian message of, if all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, that means that we've all broken in some way. Well, now what? Right? Now we know that we are all broken. Well, that's great. Well, what does that mean? And I think it's where have you ever heard of the kintsugi, Japanese kintsugi balls? Have you ever heard of that?
It sounds familiar, but
okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'll tell you about them. They are Japanese kintsugi bowls. Are basically, they're just, well, I'll say this: Japanese kintsugi is an art. Okay, and these Japanese kintsugi artists, essentially what they do, if there's an earthquake or if there's just an accident, whatever, in people's pottery, their bowls, their cups, whatever, that they fall and shatter. A lot of people just say, well, look at these are multiple pieces, it's not functional anymore, it's broken, and they want to throw it away. But the Japanese kintsugi artist sees this broken piece of pottery and says, no, there's still value here. And so what they do is they use gold, they use silver, they use platinum, and they essentially glue it back together. So this bowl that was, one piece is now 3 pieces glued together. But what's interesting about it is that even though it's no longer in a state of flawlessness, because it was broken, it's no longer perfect, it's still actually beautiful because now it's got this gold lining through it. It's got this silver. And so its brokenness actually wasn't the end of the story. And actually led to something that could have been made beautiful out of the brokenness. And I think that is just a beautiful example of what this, going back to this transformation, going from this old to new, of this idea of redemption that we talked about, all of these ideas. I think the kintsugi bowl is a great example of that, because most people looked at those broken bowls as garbage, but the artist said, I still see that there's something beautiful that can be done. Don't throw it away. I can do something with this still. And I just think that is so much of how God looks at us as our kintsugi artists. Yep, Alycia messed up. Yep, now she's got some scars and wounds. Yep, she's got to make some apologies. Yep, she's got to do some repenting. But it's not the end of the story. But because of her failures, she has now learned grace. Because of her failures, she's now learned mercy. Because of her failures, she's now learned compassion or courage, whatever it is. And so she's different now, but she's not done. She's no less worthy, no less valuable, because it's now we can take that, and I can take what I can teach her through that and now make her beautiful again.
Yeah.
And so I think that is probably the epitome of why cancel culture is a failure. Because the cancel culture leaves the broken pottery on the floor.
And throws it away.
Says
it's broken, there's nothing that can be done. But
exactly.
But the hope of the gospel says, oh, yes, there is.
Yes, there is.
Love that. What a great and incredible example of what God does. He takes the broken and makes it beautiful. And you're so right, because a lot of times in the places where we find ourselves broken, and we learn to lean and depend and rely on God in those moments, and we learn to become the people he's created us to be, then a lot of times we then share with other people who may be broken in the same way or in a similar way. Okay, look, here's what God's done for me. Here's what he can do for you. And there lies the beauty of the gospel, is that it applies to everyone who's willing to receive it. And so what a beautiful way to describe that. Now, there is this tension between, okay, we've realized the gospel, and we've realized the hope that it gives us, and it makes broken things beautiful. And then there's this tension of cancel culture, which says, you know what? You messed up. You're gone. You're out of here. You are no longer worthy of us being able to see your face. You're done with. You are that person, and you will always be. In the midst of that tension, though, how can we as Christians maybe model a better way in today's digital world, which is so quick to cancel people, which is so quick to label people and to leave them in their brokenness? How can we model a better way? How can we be better stewards of the world we've been given?
Well, I think going back to even some of the things that we have been doing, but maybe forget about, like, when people are involved in prison ministry, you're going in and you're saying, this isn't the end of your story. That's kind of where I got a lot of my start in terms of early ministry and going to juvenile detention centers and maximum and medium security prisons and, doing all of that. And then just realizing, wow, people become Christians after committing horrific crimes. They are still reaping the consequences of that because they're in prison. And I'm not advocating for them to get out. However, I am advocating for them to be free eternally.
Yeah,
and to be free here in terms of carrying that weight and that sense that they will always be defined by that. And so I think, when we do things like going into prisons, when we acknowledge, when we offer forgiveness to somebody who doesn't even ask for it, when we actually even reshape how we view ourselves, how we view us as a church, a capital C church of people who are every single one is in need of Jesus. And that's why we're Christians. I think a lot of those things are ways for us to be able to rethink and do better when it comes to this. Don't jump on this. Nobody needs your 2 cents on every social media post. Nobody needs your opinion. We always feel like we need to make ourselves known. Why? Why do you think you're so important that everybody needs to hear from you?
Yeah.
And I think we don't need to pile on, and we don't need to encourage a lot of it. And I think, a lot of people don't like the Old Testament. One of the most popular questions I get asked as an apologist is dealing with the God of the Old Testament. I love dealing with that because they're like, he seems so horrible. He seems so mean. He seems so different than Jesus. And I'm like, so you're telling me you don't want a God who judges? And the reality is he judges in both the Old and the New Testament. It's just the judgment falls on Jesus in the New. But the Old Testament reminds me that the judge of all the earth will do right. That the judge of all the earth sees things, and he advocates for the oppressed and the victims that don't have a voice, the voiceless, and he sees things. And it gives me affirmation that I don't need to be the one to jump in as a Christian and carry out the justice, because he sees it and he will do it. Yeah. He's got it. He doesn't need my help. And so I think maybe shifting some of our role. We don't need to step into God's role. Again, I keep saying I believe in the criminal justice system. I believe in the law of the land, and that they've got to institute these laws and protections. That's part of the role of the government, is the protection of and the safety of its people. But what I'm talking about is our Christian mentality and our attitude towards the person. That's what cancel culture is. It's our attitude and mentality towards that person. And so that's what I'm addressing with, is how do we do that? And when you have Jesus who's on the cross saying, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing, while he's dying, while they haven't asked for forgiveness, while they haven't acknowledged they're wrong, then it tells us we can forgive the sinner even if they don't recognize it.
And that's a whole story in itself, isn't it? Forgiveness. And
yeah.
There's so many different ways we could have gone, and maybe we can do a round 2 at some point. I just love to pick your brain about some things, but you have a way with words, and you have a way of simplifying things for us where we can understand. And so I appreciate you bringing that today.
Yeah.
And really kind of where I'd like to close is this concept of thinking about the worth of other people, because cancel culture cancels people. Jesus died for people. And you see those things juxtaposed. And you see those things on different ends of the spectrum, and you begin to realize, okay, Jesus sees every single person, and we've all sinned. We're all in the same boat, as worthy. He sees every single person as worth dying for. So number one, if you're listening to this, I want you to understand, hey, society, culture, words on social media, people that you interact with, they may try to tell you that you're not worth anything. But I want you to hear the good news of the gospel, that you are worth Jesus dying for. You are of infinite worth to God. And so I think that's something important we need to realize, because cancel culture cancels the person. It's not about the sin. It's not about what has been done that's been wrong. It's not about any of that. It's about the person and how we respond to that person. And so number 2, I'd say to the Christians out there, let's be careful how we interact. I love what you said. You don't have to respond to everything. It is perfectly okay for you to keep on scrolling. I don't know many people that, there's times and places that we as Christians need to step up in the public arena, but social media is a lot of times not that place. Words can become misconstrued, and just a lot of reasons for that. But I think we need to model a better way forward to deal with failures of other people, because hey, we have failed too. So how does Christ deal with us? He doesn't ignore the sin, but he doesn't discard the person. And so, brothers and sisters, I want to encourage you to model a better way forward in this tech world we live in. To ask yourself, WWJD, what would Jesus do? Would he cancel this person? Absolutely not. But would he show them that their story can be different? Absolutely. So if you're not living in that new story and you don't know Christ, let today be the day. And so I hope that that you guys, everyone out there listening, has been blessed by the words of Alycia today. Thank you, my sister. You're doing tremendous work, and I can't wait to see
Absolutely.
what God's going to do with this episode. But can you tell us a little bit more about where to find out, where to find you, where to find the work you're doing? You've got a book too, so if you could kind of walk us through some of that.
Well, I love that you say I have a book, because maybe you're like prophesying something I know not yet of. But I have a chapter.
Yeah, maybe it's a chapter. Yeah, yeah.
No, that's okay, because people keep pressuring me to do a book, and I'm like, that's why I give you guys a podcast. But
There you go.
so no, I know I do have a chapter in a book called Truth. It's and on gender. And but either way, I to find me, apologetics.org is going to be the easiest way. Just go to apologetics.org, and you might find me on the road somewhere traveling. I travel a lot to many different places and areas. And also I have a podcast called Hey Alycia, Alycia. It's on Apple and Spotify, and it's a podcast for Christians, non-Christians, anybody, and people send in one question to me, or I'll pick a question, I get when I'm out speaking, or a popular one, and I answer it. Just one question per episode. And also I have a section called Say What, and that's where, like, if I give an answer to a question, and you're like, I don't know about that, I don't like that, or you didn't answer it, or that was confusing, people can write back in and say, I don't like you that answer, and this is why, and then I'll respond to that.
I love that.
So they can also do that as well, or maybe they don't think it was a good Christian answer. They think Christianity still fails, or so they're allowed to write in, and then I can address that. So that's where you can find me on Apple, Spotify, and apologetics.org.
Awesome. And I'll put links to that in the show notes. But Alycia, you're a blessing.
Thank you.
You're truly a gift to the Christian community, but then also to the world as an apologist. So thanks for using your gifts to better the kingdom, and appreciate you being here with us today.
Thank you. It was very kind. Appreciate you.